So we are going to be recording. That's just so that we can post this on our YouTube channel and the next day or so that people can go back and rewatch all of these things. I'm going to put the link to our YouTube channel here in the chat for your viewing pleasure. So great. I want to welcome you guys here today and thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have Jason here with us today from Pierce County. He's going to start outlining the House Bill 1110, commonly referred to as the Middle Housing Bill. He's going to talk about what its requirements are and what the county and all of its jurisdictions must plan ahead of the 2024 periodic update. And if you're new to this series, we have been doing this series for a couple of months, so go back to that YouTube channel and check out the previous events that we've had, but we will be doing this series until December. So I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter on our website to get updates on those. And then I'll put our website in the chat as well real quick. Okay, so just a little introduction about us. My name is Casey Twiggs. I'm the membership coordinator for the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium. We are a nonprofit membership-based agency, and we provide public education and advocacy for the expansion of affordable housing in Pierce County. We do this by advocating for education, by doing education for the public for affordable housing, by hosting webinars, meetings, collecting data, sharing that with the public. We also advocate at the state and local levels for policies and funding that will support the creation of a new affordable housing. Our consortium is made up of about 60 members from affordable housing developers, financiers, construction companies, architects, consultants, and individual advocates, all dedicated to advancing affordable housing. So if you are interested in learning more about the organization or interested in becoming a member, I recommend that you go to our website. Those links are in the chat. And with that, I would like to introduce our presenter today. Jason Gauthier currently serves as the manager for the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners, also known as SHAPE. He oversees planning, advocacy, and affordable housing support services for their 15 member governments. Jason is an accomplished leader with a proven background and track record in developing public policy, fostering strategic partnerships to support affordable housing. Throughout his career, he has advanced affordable housing outcomes in advocacy and program roles, including successfully securing capital and operating budget allocations and navigating the passage of legislation to support affordable housing development. Jason also holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and we're excited to have him, and we're going to welcome him right now. Give me just a moment for a little bit of house cleaning before we start. For any questions or comments that you have, you'll wait till the end of the presentation. Feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end. And then hold your questions, and we'll have a good time for discussion and questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to pass it along to Jason.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you for the invitation today. And I'll just note, I want to thank ChatGPT for writing my introduction this morning. AI makes me sound way more accomplished than I am. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and dive into a presentation on the requirements of House Bill 1110, as Casey mentioned, most commonly known as the Middle Housing Bill. And good afternoon to all those attending as well. I see a lot of familiar names in this Zoom room. A lot of folks who have a much more expert knowledge on urban planning than I do. So there might be a time or a question or two gets asked after my presentation today where I refer you to Kenneth George from the City University Place or Paul Ingram from the Puget Sound Regional Council because they're both smarter than I am. So again, as Casey mentioned, I'm Jason Gauthier, the manager of the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners. We are an interlocal organization created in 2021 to foster the creation and preservation of affordable, attainable, and accessible housing throughout our Pierce County community. Our work focuses on support for our member governments through policy and planning efforts, regional coordination, legislative advocacy, and the alignment of affordable housing capital investments. The consortium asked me to join you all today to provide an overview of 1110, and I will jump into that in a second. So for our agenda today, I'll briefly cover a series of items that are addressed in the legislation, and then happy to take additional questions at the end of that. I think Casey said to hold questions till the end, but if you interrupt me, I won't be opposed.
Yeah, it's whatever you prefer, Jason. If you don't mind people, raising their hand, clicking that button, that's fine with me too.
I can roll with the punches, Casey. Thank you. So first, 1110 created a new definition of middle housing. This new definition defined middle housing as 9 types of housing: duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, townhomes, stacked flats, and cottage housing. It also required that these housing typologies be compatible in scale, form, and character with single-family homes. This definition also further defined cottage housing, courtyard apartments, stacked flats, and townhomes. So this bill placed new residential density requirements on cities of a certain population sizes in certain areas. Affected municipalities are broken down into 3 categories. Category 1, cities over 75,000, which are now required to allow at least 4 units per lot, 6 units on lots within a quarter mile of a major transit stop, and we'll talk about that definition later in this presentation. And 6 units on lots where at least 2 of the units are affordable. The affordability requirements in the bill mandate that if the bonus affordable units are for the purposes of rental housing, then the units must be affordable for households earning no more than 60% of the area median income. And if the units are to be used for affordable home ownership, then the income limit is raised to 80% of the area median income. In Pierce County, this category only affects one city, which is the city of Tacoma. Category 2, this is cities and towns with populations of more than 25,000, but less than 75,000. These cities are now required to allow 2 units on all lots, 4 units if the lot is within a quarter mile of a major transit stop, and up to 4 units if at least 1 is affordable, with those same affordability limits as above. This category affects the cities of Lakewood, Puyallup, and University Place. And then category 3, cities of less than 25,000 and with contiguous urban growth area, or UGA, with the largest city. I'll talk more about this in a coming up slide. This category affects the cities of DuPont, Edgewood, Fife, Fircrest, Milton, Suffolk, and Sumner, and then also the towns of Ruston and Steilacoom. These jurisdictions will all be required to allow at least 2 units per lot. There's 2 additional things that I'll point out that are on this slide. First, a city must allow at least 6 of the 9 middle housing types on all lots. And although ADUs are not considered a middle housing type, a city may allow ADUs to achieve the unit density minimum. It's also important to note that in this same legislative session, House Bill 1337 was passed, and that legislation requires cities and counties to allow at least 2 ADUs on all lots located in all zoning districts within an urban growth area that allow for single family homes. So the 1337 touches a lot more jurisdictions than 1110 does. I'll also note on the requirement to allow at least 6 of 9 middle housing types on all lots. Cities can choose how that interplays. So if they would like to, so they can mix and match those however they feel most appropriate. They can say in our city, we just don't allow courtyard apartments and allow at least the 6 of the 9 middle housing types. So there is a little bit of flexibility in that requirement for cities. So I mentioned the third category, including jurisdictions of less than 25,000 people, but but contiguous with the urban growth area with the largest city in a county of more than 275,000. Even as I say that, I can understand why there was some confusion during the legislative session about this. So I'll just reiterate for a moment. That contiguous doesn't mean that a city must share a common border with the largest city, but rather that the UGA is connected, either in sequence or via a shared border with the UGA of the largest city. So for reference, I'll note on this map, this is the reason why the cities like Bonnie Lake, Buckley, or Orting are not subject to requirements of 1110, because as you can see, their UGAs are not connected in sequence with Tacoma's urban growth area. So I mentioned the requirements of 1110. There are also two alternative requirement paths to meet those mandated density minimums. The first alternative path would require a city to implement middle housing density on at least 75% of single-family home lots. There are some additional requirements on what types of lots can and can't be excluded from rezoning. This alternative requirement also requires a number of third-party certifications to be accepted by the Department of Commerce. And then alternative path number two, we'll call this the substantially similar option. Cities can ask the Department of Commerce to approve their zoning actions as substantially similar and compliant with 1110. To be able to be considered for this alternative path, a city would either need to have adopted a substantially similar comprehensive plan by January 1st of this year, so that deadline has gone, or within 1 year of the enactment of 1110, which for us would be June 23 of 2024, and have adopted those development regulations that result in an overall increase in housing units allowed in single-family homes by at least 75%, allow middle housing throughout the city rather than just targeted locations, or and allow for additional density near major transit stops and for projects that include dedicated affordable housing. This bill also addresses development regulations. Affected cities cannot impose regulations for middle housing that are more restrictive than for single-family homes, but may apply objective development regulations, which I've listed below: setbacks, lot coverage, stormwater clearing, tree canopy, critical areas, public health, and safety. Cities must also apply the same permitting and environmental process for middle housing as they do for single-family homes, and can only apply administrative design review for middle housing. Parking, always a hot button topic. Again, a lot to cover here. This presentation was originally done for the Pierce County Regional Council. So if it's text heavy, it was meant to be a little more sort of in the weeds, but I'll try to stay a little high level here for you all. But the main highlight here is that this bill preempts parking requirements for middle housing in affected cities and creates a specific avenue via empirical study for cities to remove this preemption for safety reasons. Cities aren't able to require off-street parking within a half-mile walking distance of a major transit stop. They can't require more than one off-street parking spot per unit if the lot is smaller than 6,000 square feet, and can't require more than 2 off-street parking spots per unit on lots greater than 6,000 square feet. And then new definitions that were created in this bill that are important. I'll highlight major transit stop, a stop on a high-capacity transit system, commuter rail stops, stops on a fixed or rail guideway, and stops on bus rapid transit routes. This is an important definition, which also, interesting to note, is not in alignment with a definition of major transit stops from House Bill 1337. So there's a bit of a misalignment there that we expect the legislature to address in this coming session. So when you hear me saying within a quarter mile or a half mile of major transit stops, know that this is the definition for what is qualified as a major transit stop. And then finally, the timeline. Affected Pierce County cities will have until June 30th, 2025 to comply with the requirements of this legislation. Many affected cities will incorporate requirements of 1110 into their comprehensive plan periodic update, which is due by December 31st of 2024. If after hearing me, you're still interested in this topic, the Department of Commerce is required to publish model middle housing ordinances by January 23rd of 2024. And we'll be hosting a series of virtual open houses on this topic. The first of this series of open houses occurs at 1 p.m. today, so immediately following this webinar. So if you really want to get your fill of middle housing today, I'm happy to put the link to that webinar into the chat before I close today. So I'll take a breath now and happy to open it up to questions from the assembled group. Thanks, Casey.
Thanks, Jason. That was great. And I'm gonna probably see if you can share with me the dates again, and then I'll send that in a follow-up to everybody after we're done. Yeah, so if you have a question, feel free to, you can raise your hand, you can just go ahead and take yourself off of mute, or write it in the chat.
I'll start with a quick question. This is Aiden Espino with Habitat for Humanity. And I believe this is the case, but there's not really much affordability requirement on zoning for this middle housing or upzoning or anything along those lines, is there?
Yeah, it's a great question. Good question, Aiden. There's no requirement unless a developer seeks those, what I guess I would call bonus units. So again, for a city of over 75,000, you can plus up the minimum 4 units per lot up to 6, if at least 2 of those units are going to be affordable. And for sort of the category 2, the 25,000 to 75,000 population cities, you can go up to 4 units if at least 1 is affordable. But there's no requirement for any middle housing to be dedicated affordable housing. Now cities can make their own rules around mandatory affordability requirements, but that's not, the ability to do that is not preempted in this bill, but there's no requirement in this bill for cities to do any mandatory affordability.
And we've got lots of time for questions. So even if you feel like your question is not even fully fleshed out, or might need to talk through it, or not really sure what to ask, we've got plenty of time. So definitely don't be shy, because we will end if no one else has anything else they want to discuss or have any questions. But this is a great time. So many great people in the room that can possibly tune in and answer your question if Jason and I can't. So just throwing that out there. Just feel free to ask anything. This is a public space. Cynthia, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm not using my video. I apologize for that. But my question for Jason is, what do you think are the probabilities that this will actually happen in cities' comp plans and in actuality? I think that some of us have looked at it and feel like there's resistance on the one hand, and there's some overwhelming requirements through the other bill that requires housing at different levels of income. So what do you think are the prospects for this?
There's a few questions there, Cynthia. So I'll try to break your question apart into a few different things. I think number one, you asked about the probability to be incorporated into their comprehensive plan. I think the cities that we work with at SHAPE, I think, are a bit split on how on incorporating it into their comprehensive plan. Oftentimes, it just has to do with capacity and what their original planning was sort of staking out. So, number one, as far as ones that will adopt the middle housing requirements before the end of 2024, that's sort of a 50-50 split, I would say. But you have to talk individual cities about that. They are required to adopt the requirements by June 30th, 2025. So there's no getting around it for the mandated cities, in Pierce County that I went through earlier. So they do have to. And as far as effect, I think even the legislature that passed this bill would tell you, this is planning for the middle housing we know won't appear overnight, or at least wide scale development of middle housing and infill housing won't occur overnight. But we plan for the future. The comprehensive plan plans us out through 2044, and so that's our planning horizon. Most of us won't be around, and at least in these roles, when the end of that comprehensive plan is on that horizon, we reach that horizon. I think, did that answer most of your questions, Cynthia?
Well, part of the conversation that happened at a recent workshop was that cities may put this in their plans, but then they won't do anything to implement it. So I just wanted to see what your perspective is, having worked with a number of jurisdictions on housing issues. Where do you think they're actually going? So I think you did as well as you could have. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just note on, I guess there's an interesting, so they're required to do a number of pieces here. And implementation is part of that requirement. I think maybe what I think a lot of people ask is, what are the additional things that cities can do to encourage that type of middle housing development? In the next couple of weeks, we'll be posting on our website, which I put the link to earlier, and I'll put again. We recently completed a 5-jurisdiction middle housing grant with the cities of Edgewood, Fife, Milton, Gig Harbor, and University Place on middle housing. And one of the things that our consultant brought back to us as part of the requirement of that were a menu of strategies, policies, and programs to encourage middle housing development. So I think there's the sort of the planning implementation, but then there's also what are the additional things that jurisdictions can do to encourage that type of development. And I think that's where advocates, especially the Affordable Housing Consortium, can be a great partner with cities that realize that infill development for many of them is the way that they'll reach their housing targets. Is to really work through those specific examples and great policy and program recommendations that will help them realize the new development opportunities that the requirements of 1110 will bring. So cities create the opportunities, they set the playing field, and then members of the Affordable Housing Consortium and other housing developers, they play in that playing field. And the hope is that, I guess at the end of the day, that we have a lot of folks playing a lot in the development field.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback up on that too. Talking to Robin from Gig Harbor, they had a lot of questions in a workshop they did recently about, what if the city tries to opt out or doesn't really, wants to do some, but not all of it. Is there a path to do that if the community kind of comes around, to it? And basically, I think, and correct me if I misinterpreted this, but it sounds like, if jurisdictions that are required to plan and accommodate and, meet these requirements, if they don't do that, they can lose a lot of funding. And kind of be, maybe you've heard the term blacklisted from certain funding streams for that city. So that would be pretty huge. And I think that's supposed to be an incentive to fully accommodate all the requirements, or there are going to be ramifications. So there is at least something like that put in place too, although I don't know all of the details.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. So I'm going to answer a question from the chat. Paul Ingram from the Puget Sound Regional Council asked, do you expect cities to run into conflicts with other code provisions? Some examples were subdivisions and utilities. I know I'll comment upon sort of infrastructure, sort of utilities. And I think this is going to be a huge issue for a number of our sort of late coming cities. So I'll use Lakewood as a really good example of this. If you drive through sort of Lakewood, I think we know like the city center area where the mall is and things like that. But when you go out into sort of the far-reaching areas of Lakewood, it was only 30 years ago that was unincorporated Pierce County, and that city is really running into some significant concerns about specifically its water and wastewater infrastructure to serve the potential new demands on those systems. And so, I think one of the things our cities are really talking a lot with the legislature about, and our federal partners as well, is how can those partners assist with sort of as part of the planning environment to ensure that we're able to when developers are ready to come and do it, that the sort of, again, the playing field is set to allow them to bring those units to bear on the market. So, there's a lot of pieces that go into that. As part of our middle housing grant study, we actually did a lot of mapping on infrastructure deficiencies. Part of that work that we did with those 5 cities was to identify areas of sort of highest opportunity, right, for middle housing development. And one of the biggest barriers to run into was infrastructure deficiencies. And so I think mapping that out for those cities, now, and then as part of their comprehensive plan, they do have a capital facilities part of that plan. I think, we try to work when we do long range planning to be in alignment with all of the things that we're doing. And so ensuring alignment between those infrastructure upgrades and our housing element goals is going to be critical, and ensuring that there's funding available for those cities, whether that's through the Public Works Assistance Account or as money continues to roll out from the bipartisan infrastructure bill that Congress passed a couple of years ago. It's going to be really critical that we see those dollars come into Pierce County and our affected municipalities to ensure that what's underground matches what's going to come above ground in the future.
Right. Any lingering thoughts? Any questions? Any even beginnings of thoughts that we could work through to get to a question and answer? Yeah, go ahead.
I know I asked a question, but I figured I might as well. Is there has there been legislation passed relating to permitting that pairs with this middle housing bill, or where's permitting in part of this conversation?
Permitting is a huge part of the comprehensive plan conversation. So I think the previous lunch and learn that the Affordable Housing Consortium put on was around the requirements of House Bill 1220, specifically the new housing element provisions. And again, this is another pitch for the consortium and its members to get really involved with all of our Pierce County cities, even ones that you don't work in all that often. Part of that is sort of identifying the barriers to development. And I know I hear a lot from developers that the regulatory environment, permitting specifically, is often a barrier. It slows down the process. I think that's a great place to get involved. So as far as 1110, the only sort of what I would call permitting requirements were that I'll simplify the language. You can't treat middle housing differently than you do a single family home. You can't place additional burdens on its development, additional non-objective development requirements on its permitting that you do on single family homes. So you can't create a regulatory preference for single family homes versus middle housing. I think that's one of the places that cities will have to, are working through right now of how do we treat them, the same. And there's going to be a lot of work to do there. So again, there's a lot of areas to advocates are when advocates are best prepared with the underlying information of what jurisdictions are having to do and bringing that to bear, I think is really important in this process. And then you mentioned, I'll just answer your question, part of your question there too. The legislature did pass a bill this year. I believe, top of my head, it was Senate Bill 5290. It was a Senator Mullet bill regarding permitting timelines. I haven't read that bill in a couple of months, so I'm not gonna spend any time commenting on it. But it did require a few new timeline updates for jurisdictions and their permitting timeline. So that might be something to for you and your clients to look into as part of this process.
I have an
Sweet,
oddball
thanks.
question to throw out there. This is Kenneth, University Place. I'm not big on money or cost of things, but for Jason or anyone else on the call, the middle housing grant that's available, that's not a significant amount. So I think for University Place, we're only eligible for the $50K because we did the previous middle housing grant, and just not 100% sure if that seems reasonable enough to actually do the work to implement this implement House Bill 1110. And so outside we applied for the grant, but I'm wondering, how far do I need to push to, the city council to try and maybe put some more money into it, or if we're just going to be able to do what we can with what we got.
Well, Kenneth, this might be a good question as well for our planners work group tomorrow, but I'll just for those on this call, and I do see a few elected officials on this call as well. I think that's the expertise of the staff, right? If you're going to, depending on the timeline in which the planning staff of affected cities want to or feel like it's appropriate to implement the requirements of 1110. I don't know the exact cost that it'll cost to comply with 1110 for the city of University Place, nor for the city of Milton. But I know it'll cost money and staff time to do. And I don't know. I think a lot of folks looked at that money as, can we just add this to the scope of work for our comp plan consultants contracts, and will they say yes to doing the additional work for $50,000 more dollars? I haven't had that conversation with any consultants. I think the hope is that maybe yes, but I don't have a great sense of what that dollar figure is. But yeah, but let's put that on the shelf for our planners collaboration meeting tomorrow.
Okay, great. I like that. Thank you.
And just for the audience, what Kenneth is referencing, I mentioned SHAPE's middle housing grant last year with those 5 cities. The legislature put aside more money this year. I forget the exact budget amount for middle housing grants to not necessarily to comply with 1110, but the way Commerce wrote them was for affected cities so that they could comply, and cities that wanted to adopt middle housing sort of development requirements that were not required to could as well. So the legislature did put some additional money on the table, but I think, as Kenneth is saying, I think the legislature will need to spend some time in this coming session considering some additional investments to support both affected cities and cities that might not fall into the requirements, but have an interest and a desire to incorporate more middle housing typology into their cities and towns. And Aiden, I see your question in the chat. I will quickly answer it. Do I expect any changes or edits? I do expect a couple of technical fixes, which is what the short session, as you know, is often used for. They won't be significant. I think that we'll see some clarification on some definitions, but as far as changes that will affect the underlying legislation, no, I don't expect any major changes.
All right. Do we have any other questions at the moment? All right. If not,
Well, Casey,
we can.
before we close out, I'm going to put something in the chat for you all. I've mentioned our middle housing grant a number of times. This is if you go to our website, you can't find this, but we do have this page live. You just can't find it on our website. But because you've all been so wonderful audience today, I'm going to put this in the chat. So these are sort of the results of SHAPE's 5-city collaboration middle housing grant for you all to take a look at. It might be very interesting. It might be not, or it might be not interesting at all to some of you, but it lays out the grants, our deliverables, and then also some fact sheets around middle housing. So feel free to take a look at that.
Awesome. Thanks. And I'll also all of the information and links and things that you've provided in the chat today, I'm going to include that in the follow-up email to everybody. So if you're not able to catch it right now, it'll be coming to you in an email. Yeah, so I think that'll kind of wrap us up. Feel free to, as we're kind of wrapping up the next minute or so, to interrupt me with another question if it pops up in your head or something. But you can
Casey?
always email me with questions as well.
Hey, Casey and Jason, okay if we share that information broadly across the region? The middle housing materials?
Paul, let's hold off on that. We're still making some sort of just looks changes, but as soon as Mary Connolly, I see on this call, gives me the thumbs up, we'll get that over to you and PSRC staff as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. No rush, but when you're ready, let us know and we'll put a blog post out or something.
It'll be ready for your consumption and dissemination no later than October 12th, Paul. Mary will be presenting our middle housing work at the American Planning Association of Washington's annual conference.
Yeah, great.
Amanda?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation, Jason. Do you know what other jurisdictions are working on racial equity analysis as well as part of the middle housing?
Well, they're required to do a racial equity analysis. That requirement is part of House Bill 1110, and now the housing element requirement. So they are Paul, but PSRC is really the regional leader in sort of the data collection and dissemination on a lot of that work. But yeah, they are working on it. I don't check in necessarily on like the progress of their comprehensive plan updates, but it's a requirement of the comprehensive plan housing element. So that work is I'm sure underway in all of our planning jurisdictions. So, and it has to be done by December 31st, 2024. Is that right? Yeah, comp plans have to be done by, so comp plans have to be done by that date. I think you'll begin seeing in many of our jurisdictions, you'll begin seeing sort of the drafts of those sort of begin to appear next summer at planning commissions and councils. At a certain point, they go to the Department of Commerce for review. They go to PSRC specifically for review in their transportation element. So there's a lot of touch points in between. So some jurisdictions have been sort of already doing a lot of community outreach and stakeholder engagement. Others are just beginning that work. So more and more, I think the advocate community, the developer community will be hearing from municipalities to get feedback. And a big part of that is identifying those barriers to development in their communities and looking to remove those barriers or at least mitigate those barriers to development. Yeah, thank you. And for those of you, it's a pitch for Housing Washington now, but for those of you attending Housing Washington, I'll be on a panel there with Department of Commerce and Lakewood City staff to talk about the requirements of House Bill 1220 and then how to best engage with planning jurisdictions to help to be a real partner and collaborator on, identifying those barriers, identifying ways in which it'll become to make it easier and more streamlined to develop both affordable and market rate housing in those communities.
All righty. Great. Thank you for those last minute details. Yeah, so that's gonna do it for today, y'all. Our next Lunch and Learn is gonna be on Wednesday instead of a Thursday. It's gonna be Wednesday, October 11th. Erica Rhett Hunt is gonna be back from Pierce County. She's gonna be discussing how the county specifically the county plans to meet both HB 1220 and 1110. So it's going to kind of bring together a lot of things that we've heard and discussed the last few Lunch and Learns and get the county's perspective on planning on what they're planning to do. So I think that's going to be a really, really good one. You can register for that on our website. And yeah, feel free to email me if you have any questions about the series or about the content or anything. And I will be sending out a follow-up email as well. I don't know if you've seen it in the chat, but Amanda wants me to remind everybody that we're having our annual fundraiser on October the 12th. It's going to be at the Museum of Glass, and you're welcome to attend. RSVP on our website, and yeah, get a table, be a sponsor. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Everybody have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.